We are live. It is 6:43. Tonight, I want to talk about a question that I get all the time. And this goes way, way back to the beginning days of like performance automotive stuff. And that question is, do I need to lower my compression when I add boost or before I add boost, let's say? So if I got a combination, do I need to lower the compression if I want to run a turbo or a blower or whatever thing we're using, to add boost to it? And the question is, they want a yes or no answer. The problem is it's really not a yes or no answer question. And that's because they're not asking really the right question. And the question with that has a lot more to do with my question to them is always, well, what is the octane? So if you are racing something and you're trying to make as much power as you can and you're adding a turbo to it, just run whatever is there. Is it? And the other question is, well, what are you trying to do this on a budget? Is this an absolute thing? Is this a maximum effort deal? Is it a daily driver? Is it a junkyard thing? We have to clear all of that stuff up before we can, guys want a universal answer, but there isn't one. Typically, if we look at the history of this, the OEMs ever offered a naturally aspirated version and a supercharged version like the 3800 V6 or the Dodge Omni that I have as a turbo one and an NA one. And whenever any of the manufacturers offered naturally aspirated versions, the Ford turbo stuff, same way, 2.3 liter stuff, whenever they did naturally aspirated versions, those were higher compression. When they did the turbo and or supercharged combinations, those were lower compression. If you take a look at a Porsche turbo, especially the early ones, all very, very low compression. And the reason that they're doing in that is they're trying to hedge their bet so that if we lower the compression, we reduce the potential for detonation. And the interesting thing with that is that if we talk about going, adding boost to something, we're changing two things. And we're changing two things that independently change the engine's like susceptibility or likelihood of detonation. So one thing you're changing when you're adding boost is you're adding temperature. So we're adding air temperature. Even if you run an intercooler, it's never going to be down as low as ambient unless you're running an ice water intercooler. So, but on a typical application, you heat the boost up with boost and you cool it off. You get some of it back basically with intercooler. But when it goes in, it's hotter than it goes in when it's naturally aspirated. So you have a change in temperature, which can induce detonation all by itself. Even if you just did that naturally aspirated, if you're drawing air right off of the header versus drawing ambient air outside the engine compartment, you could have a change in temperature of 100 degrees or more. And the one that's 100 degrees hotter would be much more likely to detonate. Forget about the power output. The one that has 100 degree more charge temperature or more air temperature is going to make less power, but it's going to be more likely to detonate because of the temperature. So on the boosted thing, independent of the extra power, you have a temperature change. Then now if we look at with you adding a turbo or a blower, you're going to increase cylinder pressure. So the cylinder pressure, the rise in cylinder pressure is also going to change. Here, I'll go ahead and get these things going so you can kind of see what's going on here. The change in cylinder pressure is also going to change the detonation threshold of the motor. So you get things that are working independently. Then we need to look at other things like timing, and we need to look at air fuel and all that stuff. And so what we're trying to do when we run boosted motors is we are trying to get it to be basically safer and to be able to run the higher power level of the turbo or supercharged combination at the same octane, primarily for OEM guys. They're trying to do it on pump gas. So the way that we hedge our bet is, hey, let's make this lower compression. We'll add the boost. We'll get more power than we took away from changing the compression. We'll have more performance. We'll still have the safety margin. Now with modern vehicles, and this is the way that it was done, kind of back in the day. But if you look at modern stuff, because we can rely so heavily, they have such sophisticated management systems. If you look at these and their ability to basically, listen for knock and then adjust accordingly, almost immediately, you can run, much more on the edge. And really for an OEM application, because we wouldn't do this as individual performance people, but at the OEM level, what they're doing is hedging their bet against people that, hey, I got to have the most powerful version that you have. I want the big supercharged thing or the big turbocharged thing, but then I'm going to put 87 octane in it. Well, you shouldn't be doing that, and they don't recommend that, but people do it anyway. So what they have to do is tune this thing so that it will run when knuckleheads do stuff like that. And the nice thing about the more sophisticated we get with knock sensor technology and fuel injection is that they can have it pull enough timing for that knuckleheaded instance, but still allow us to do the right thing and have enough octane running 91 in it or 93 in it in terms of pump gas to be able to do that and get the power that we need out of it, so that it has an optimized tune under all those conditions at various boost levels. Because as we go up in boost, we need to change things. We need to change the amount of timing that the motor needs, or even that it will tolerate with a given octane. So the question that I'm showing you here, if you take a look at what's going on, this is a test that I ran comparing 706 heads to 317 heads. And we ran them both naturally aspirated, and we ran boost. Now, on this particular test is more than just what we were talking about here in terms of dropping the compression and then, adding boost. On this particular instance, the 317 heads also flow more than the 706 heads, but they do drop the compression a full point. And so we have a drop in power from that, potentially an increase in power from flow. Although when we ran these things, and I'll go ahead and show you. So these are the dyno results. Those will just stay there. And what we have here are two sets of railroad tracks. And the lower set of railroad tracks is the same motor as a 706 headed deal that we ran. And I'll go ahead and give you a description here. So the description is a 5.3. We ran a single turbo on it. It was a junkyard 5.3. It had a stock bottom end. It had the Comp 454 cam, which is a 613, 623, a 227, 243 duration, inch and 7/8 headers, an LS6 intake manifold. So basically a very nicely cammed 5.3, if you will. And so this thing made 450 horsepower or so, and then made quite a bit more when we ran the 706 heads. It made so the power went up from 448 to 468. So we made about 20 more horsepower with the 706 heads over the 317 heads. And then that amount changed to 688 to 722. So 30 to 40 horsepower, let's say, under boost. And then we have the thing making over 700 horsepower with the turbo combination. And that was a single turbo. I think that was a test description. So our turbo combination was a single precision 76 millimeter turbo. We had our air to water intercooler on it, and we were running a maximum of 8 pounds. It was 7.7, 7.8. It showed 8 pounds in one spot, and then but right in the mid-7 range to mid-7 to 8 pounds of boost on this kind of combination. So it worked very well. So the question on this one is, okay, we know that the 706 head makes more than the 317 head. We've tested that a lot, and it always does that. It doesn't matter that the 317 head flows more. The 706 head flows enough to support this power level, and it has much more efficiency. It's got smaller valves, it's got smaller ports, it has more compression. And guys can argue that this is all compression. Okay, that's fine too. Just let's say that that's what it is, just to make people happy. There are interesting things to talk about when we're talking about that. One is that having more power NA, especially down low, which we have quite a bit of torque down there, is going to help spool the turbo. And so if you have a big enough turbo, and the 76 millimeter turbo is a 4-digit power level turbo, if you're going to try to spool a bigger turbo with a relatively smaller motor, having that extra power down low is definitely beneficial. But Here's the flip side of that. And this is what I want to talk about in terms of my pro 317 position, is that if we do lower the compression on this, in this particular instance, it's not very high compression anyways. A stock 5.3, an LM7 with a 706 head is mid nines anyways. It's not like it's very high compression. It'd be more so if we had 706 heads on a flat top 5.3, then I might argue against it. But if we put the 317 heads, an interesting thing happens. Something bad happens. I don't like the fact that it loses the low speed power and boost response. I'm a big fan of that. And this camshaft would not be the one that I would choose for that, by the way, either. I just put a low buck truck camshaft in it and call it a day and be much happier with the boost response. But even though we do have a reduced boost response with the 317, we can see that down low there, even though we do have less boost response and that it makes less power at any given boost level, is that the whole thing? No, it's not. It is for a guy that's just talking about power. Yeah, the 317 heads make more. And so guys can go on and argue about that, whatever. But here's the question is, what happens when we try to use this in the real world? So if we're running something that has 8 pounds of boost, this is definitely something you could run on pump gas at this power level. You could run this on pump gas. I don't think you could run all the time because we ran good gas in this. But I would argue that with the 317 heads and the lower compression, if you're talking about a difference of 30 horsepower here or 40 horsepower here, that's just a pound of boost or at the most a pound and a half of boost. So we run another pound and a half of boost. Okay. The question then becomes, if we run the other pound and a half of boost with the 317 heads, are we in a better position detonation wise than we are with the 706? We're never going to get back to low speed response, but it might be with the 706 head and 8 pounds of boost running pump gas that we can't run the same amount of timing that we can with a 317 head. And also we can't run the same amount of boost. The boost would be way more important than the timing. We've done lots of tests here on this channel, and I showed you what happens when we run these tests, when we do different levels of timing. Hey, here's what the turbo thing does at 23 pounds and 21 pounds and 20 pounds and 19 all the way down to 15 pounds. And you could see when we strip timing out of it, it has a big effect on power. It could be, 50 horsepower or more. But the nice thing about this is that when you're talking about a pound of boost being worth 30 horsepower or 40 horsepower, it's easy to get that back. And the change that you would get in temperature from 1 pound of boost in an intercooled application would be very, very little. You are going to get more cylinder pressure by doing that. But I would argue that the cylinder pressure isn't any higher at the same power level as it was with the other combination. That would be kind of an interesting test. And I don't have an answer to that. I think the cylinder pressure trace would be the same. If the torque curve is the same, the cylinder pressure trace is definitely going to be the same. So if that's the same, that has the same, detonation threshold level as before, and then we lowered the compression, we would have to obviously argue about whether or not this chamber design, other than just being bigger or smaller, is that chamber design more or less susceptible to detonation? Like, is one more prone to detonation than the other, irrespective of the boost levels? So that would be another nitpicky thing that guys could talk about. That would be interesting. But like I said, if we take a 317 headed deal instead of a 706, we lower the compression, we add a little bit of boost, and maybe even we could add a little bit of timing, and then we're making as much or more, and maybe we could make more power with a given detonation threshold with the lower compression and more boost than we could the other way. That's something I can't really show you on the engine dyno. It'd be much better to show you on the street to see if we were actually running knock sensors, and obviously I think it'd be better to show that with a factory ECU to see what it was really doing, what it wanted to do. We could get knock counts with it. We could get data logging. We could have all that stuff to see what was happening, to find out if, hey, look, we're able to run this thing at and for me, I would be picking a power level. We could pick a boost level, but that's irrelevant because we have to run more boost with one of those than the other anyway. But let's say that we were able to we could only run less than 700 horsepower with the 706 combination and 650 foot-pounds of torque, which is where I think the detonation would be anyway. Let's say we could do that on pump gas with a 706 head, but we could do more than 700 and more than 650 foot-pounds with the lower compression 317 heads, because we could add more boost. I would like to have that information, but unfortunately I have dyno stuff, and that's not really enough to answer that, but it's always cool stuff to talk about. But we'll see what you guys got going on. So I'll go ahead and we'll show some more photos of it. So we had the two heads. We had, this thing was a 5.3. We had head studs on, ARP head studs like we always put on. We had Felpro head gaskets. We had that comp cam. We could have run a BTR cam or my low buck truck camshaft. Probably would be better, I would think. But as we know, every cam is a turbo cam, including that 454 comp cam. Had a pair of wastegates on there. Had the intercooler on there. That was early on, that was the Y pipe that I used with the tubular headers, which I didn't like because they were really close to the spark plug wires, which is not good. That was a big 3-inch Y pipe, which I don't think it needed. And that was before I did the adapter to go from a 3-inch V-band to either a T3 or a T4 or a T6, so I could put any kind of turbo I wanted. This was the very first one that we did. When I say we, Jason from JT Fab basically did the welding on that, but we used it a lot and it worked really well. I should have put the headers as an up and over and not under, because then Matt from Sloppy would have lost his mind about that. Scottish, what's going on, Kelly? LS. Good to see you guys. Good topic. I have 317 heads. They work. And for pump gas, really might be the way to go. Although I would have a really hard time getting myself to put those on a 4.8 because it just takes away too much. How's everybody doing? How much boost? What fuel? How much power? How many cylinders? Yes, it's all of that. If I want an NA, what head on a 6-liter would you use, and what work would you have done to it as in machining? Well, lucky for you, there is a video up, and there's actually several up on the channel about how to maximize the power output of a 6-liter. And there's lots of those. I think the most we did on a 6-liter was probably 600 or so horsepower. So it was 100 horsepower per liter. That's not the most you can do. That's just the most that we did. But you have to have some sort of good head. And then also, do you want that power at a high RPM? So do you want one of these short runner manifolds? Do you want 600, but like lots of torque too, like a fast or a high ram? Or, what do you want to do? You can, that's why I do what I do. So you can go there and look at all those curves and then pick which one you want. I built my 402 with 10.5-to-1, pump 94 on boost, but I don't push it on pump gas. Yeah, the other easy way to do this is not worry about this and just have flex fuel and then run E85, and then that solves all the problems. Do you have a stock GM fuel pump for a 5.3 truck is adequate for E85 NA application? Do you mean, does it flow enough, or do you mean, will it survive the E85? I would think it probably is okay for the power level for E85 because you're only asking it to flow about 25% more fuel. I think that there's that much in it. Cylinder pressure changes dynamic compression. No. The opposite might be true. Get a Hellcat pump. Stock pump would be gummed up, I would imagine. I have a turbo 2002 Silverado. Nice. I like the 2002 Team 002 with a 4.8 and a manual transmission, an NV3500. There's almost no videos about it. Yeah, I've never sat in one that had a factory manual trans. Mine's a 5.3 with an automatic, like most of ours. Mine's a 4-wheel drive one, but a manual one would be cool. What fuels can your fuel injectors and fuel pump run? Yeah, it can run pump or E85. It can run race fuel, all of that. I don't know. You'd have to size them for methanol. I don't know. I'd have to see what the compatibility would be with methanol. What size is the backside of that turbo? It's a 76-75, if I remember right. I have a question about oil pumps. What is good about a high volume pump? I hear it will suck the pan dry. Which engine family are you talking about? It's not going to do that on It's not going to do that on almost any motor. The question isn't that. The question is, do you need more volume and pressure? Because that's what you're going to get. You'll get both of those. Zoo Truck, what's going on? I have a stock. I know I'm a little early, actually. Anybody know where we can get stock main bolts from? Not wanting to rehone the crank germs for ARPs. Yeah, are you looking for LS ones? Just go to the wrecking yard. I tried to send a new clip, but AOL didn't like me sending a video over 10 seconds. Yeah, that's okay. Just shorten it down. It doesn't need to be 10 seconds. It just needs to be 5 seconds or something. Just cut it in half. Patrick said BTR has replacement bolts. Yeah, we use factory bolts on the main stuff and all of the Big Bang stuff. So all of the 1500 horsepower stuff, that's all stock main bolts. Currently building an LQ4 370 30 over bore. Yeah, I don't recommend that. Flat top summit pistons using a compression calculator. If I use 71 cc chambers, it will be 10.3. With a 68, it'll be 10.5. Okay. And you're not thinking about running boost on that, right? And you've checked to see that you have enough sleeve thickness in there to run that? Oh, a 370. Okay, never mind. For some reason, I was thinking you had a 4065 bore in that. You continue on. You're all good. Does a thicker head gasket lower compression enough to actually make a difference in knock sensitivity or the octane you're able to run? Yes. You can change head gasket thickness a lot and change compression a lot. But the other thing you're doing is you're changing quench when you do that too. That's why it's better to do it with a chamber size change or a piston change. S40 turbo with F-body pan here. I need a half a quart over full on the stick to maintain oil pressure. I just bought a 63 Tempest for my channel with a Trophy 4. Nice. Came across your video, but couldn't find anything after it was rebuilt. I haven't run it yet. It's just sitting all painted and ready to go. I just need to run it. And I got a bunch of stuff for it. You need some high compression 2-valve stuff. Yeah, I don't even have a 2-valve motor anymore. My Trophy 4 looks like it came out of the Titanic. Running a Gen 2.5 7875. Run 6 quarts in the F-body pan. When we overfill pans, that's when we get windage problems. My Denali I'm building is an O2. There you go. O2 squad. Squad goals. Painted my 544 valve covers. Man, they're difficult to prep, yeah. As for the topic at hand, I'm running 2cc dome pistons and a 30 over LH6 block with AFR enforcer heads. Have hit 12 psi on pump gas and 18 psi on E85 with no issues. Okay. Got a VS Racing 85102. Compression, no turbo blower to brake. Did you see Cletus run a bone stock 5.3 on? Yeah, I saw when they were doing nitromethane on it. Working on a 6-liter BTR stage 2 cam, 706 heads, bolting up to 6266s. Planning on 7 pounds. I need to run. I'm curious why you, on a 6-liter, why you pick those heads for a turbo application. I wouldn't do that. I would pick 706 heads on a 6-liter if you were wanting to have a high compression NA deal. But I wouldn't pick those for a blower deal. I would have just, if that 6-liter came with 317s, I would have just left those on there. But you will be able to run 91 or 93. You'll just have to strip a bunch of timing out of it. Michael, we got home from test and tune at the drag strip. Wore my wrong cam shirt. Nice. Did people ask you why you want to have the wrong cam? So is it usually chamber roughness or some other geometry that causes hot spots? There have to be something to make one chamber more prone to knock. Yes, but it's not. I mean, it can be hot spots. It can be carbon deposits, but it can also be the shape and design of the chamber itself that creates localized hotspots that start detonation. If you're running bad gas, don't try to find the limits of compression on a boosted motor. Yeah, that's not good. Better to undershoot on compression and add more pound to boost. I agree. That's a better thing for pump gas. You can intercool boost, but you can't intercool compression. Yeah. How is oil capacity determined? Like how big of a pan is too big? The pan size is not an issue. In fact, if you look at drag race motors, the pans will be really big, but a lot of them will be, and oil or boat ones also will be really big square pans, but you want to keep them down low away from the rotating assembly. And then you have windage trays and all sorts of things also. Any specific rods and pistons you go with on an NA build? I know the crank is fine, but would an aftermarket crank have less rotating mass, faster revs? I don't know that faster revs is going to generate more horsepower. Just its ability to free rev. I don't know that those go together. But I don't know what kind of power you're trying to make. Are you putting like high compression? Is this an NA thing? There's so many good rods and pistons out there. The ones that we use on the NA stuff, we use some CP and Carrillo stuff, like their Bullet Series stuff. But K1 has good stuff. JE has good stuff. Wiseco has good stuff. You mentioned when you overfill pans, you get windage issues. Is that, well, it's windage. It's the rotating assembly beating the oil up. And then what happens is we lose oil pressure when that happens because the pump is picking up aerated oil. And then the other thing that can happen is the lifters stop working well because they don't like aerated oil either. So it's a problem. And it's more of a problem on big blocks. When I run LS motors on the engine dyno, I run them a half a quart low. You informed me that my LS3 injectors are fine for a low buck truck cam. I think I said okay. LS3 injectors are, as are my springs. The motor looks fresh, but has 120,000 miles, 29,000 miles on it. I bought springs from you. Should I change or save for later? You can do either one. I wouldn't have a problem running 129,000 mile springs on them. If I was putting the motor together, I probably would just check them on a spring tester and just make sure that none of them are softer than the others. Usually what happens is when you run springs, they take a set and then they're that way like almost forever. Katie wants to remind everybody that he runs an LS6 468, 11.5 to 1 with 20 pounds on 92 octane. So what, do you have negative timing in that? How many inches are the headers? These headers are 1 3/4, I think, on the turbo thing, if that's what you're talking about. On the NA stuff, I think the NA ones were also 1 3/4. I'll take a look at the photo and see. We also have 1 7/8 stuff that we run on a lot of them. I'll know by the photo of that. Those were 1 7/8. Doesn't really make a big difference on that 5.3. Richard, has there any testing been done on the 12-cylinder that was in the back of the truck? We haven't run that yet. Did you ever figure out if you can run a V8 distributor on the trophy 4-cylinder? I don't know for sure. I guess that was a 63 thing. That's how they got more power. What, with flat tops? They had a bunch of different power levels for that trophy 4-cylinder. 2-barrel ones and 1-barrel ones and 4-barrel ones, different compression ones. At what point does the stock LS valve start to have problems? I don't know I don't know heat or lift. I don't know problems with either one of those. I built it NA 4 years ago. Time for turbos. I do have 317 still. Plan to throw those back on. It'd probably be a good idea. I'd rather see you do that. Has anyone here ever seen a high-rise tunnel ram with a TRX2 with dual carbs and turbos? So you want to do 2 blow-through carburetors? I know that would be expensive. I don't have any experience with Phytech. I haven't ever run one. Yeah, frothy oil is bad. That way more big block stuff that we have problems with oiling than LS stuff. Purchasing a 427 Dart block using Frankenstein boost monster heads, BTR stage 4 cam. How much horsepower am I leaving on the table running 93 versus running race gas? A lot, because you're not going to be able to run very much boost or very much timing with your turbo setup. You're going to be leaving hundreds and hundreds of horsepower on the table if you're talking about a maximum effort kind of thing. Which gauges are more accurate, electronic or mechanical gauges, aftermarket wise? I think you can get good accurate gauges in both setups. When I test things and I want to, well, like what I wanted to compare the sending unit and the gauge in the truck, I put a mechanical gauge on it. But running a mechanical gauge into the car, like with oil pressure and stuff, is not a good idea. Do you know any companies that do custom long tube headers? Can't find any affordable headers. Yeah, I don't know that you're going to want somebody to, you're going to want to pay somebody to do long tubes. I think you'd be better off buying a set of headers that kind of fit and then making those fit just by cutting the tubing and bending the tubing or hammering it. What combination on a Gen 353 to make the most low RPM power for the absolute best fuel economy? I would suggest you put a smaller motor in it if fuel mileage is what your concern is. Otherwise, I've never seen anybody try a smaller than stock cam if fuel mileage was your only thing. And then a DOD would be a good setup, and a VVT would also be a good setup for fuel mileage. Blow through at 14 degrees initial. Haven't even thrown a light on it for total in hot weather. I'll pull a couple degrees per pound, 1-to-1 for most. I don't. An initial timing doesn't really tell me anything, Katie. The boost. And is this that's a big block, right? So a big block is going to have a lot more timing than an LS does, even NA. I've seen a lot of people have problems with tulip or stretching valves. Not sure if they were stock or not. I don't know what you mean by a lot. In the 30 years that I've been running these things, I've never seen a tulip valve. Well, I can't say never. I have seen that one time, and that was on my motor, and it was a small block Ford, and it was because we ran it lean in the Silver State race and stayed at wide open throttle until the motor melted down. So that was on me. We don't have any air fuel gauge. All we did was run the car out of gas. And so that's when we got them so hot that they get hot, and then the spring pressure just pulls up and tulips the valve, and then it doesn't seal anymore or make any power. What born stroke on a 6-liter would you go to if you want 600 horsepower, and could this be achieved on a factory exhaust, emissions and all that? Well, I don't know if you could do it through factory exhaust manifold. If you're trying to get 600 horsepower, you're not going to do it through factory exhaust manifolds or through cats and all that stuff. Maybe you could if you're talking about going bigger than 6-liter. But to make a 6-liter get 600 horsepower, it takes really, really good heads, a really, really good intake manifold, compression, a really, really big camshaft, all that stuff. What are the downsides with running a set of compound turbos which are the same size? Well, you're not really gaining anything by doing that. What upgrades do you do to a 6-liter Gen 3 iron block if you want 1500 horsepower NA before adding turbos or something else? Well, take a look at the Big Bang videos that I have up, and you'll see what we did. We were trying to do it with a stock bottom end. We were trying to do it, the block is the least of the troubles, or least of the problems. The Gen 3 stuff is not as strong as the Gen 4 stuff in terms of rod and pistons. And so we were trying to see if we could get there with a factory rod and a factory piston with just ring gap. And we did. But 1,500 horsepower is not going to be something that you're going to be driving around on. And what we did is we used the stock bottom end, but put a good camshaft in it, put ported heads on it, put a good intake manifold on it, and then 2 really big turbos. I just built a set of turbo headers and had $1,000 in materials, 321 stainless, 1/2-inch thick flanges. Yeah, but everybody can't do that, Dan. He's asking if somebody else can come to his place and build custom headers, and that's not cheap. Is hammering and bending the headers hurt performance? No, not according to the testing that the guys from Engine Masters did. It took a lot of them hammering on headers before it had any effect on power at all. Any recommendations for a good fuel-efficient cam or crank to de-stroke the 5.3? You don't need to de-stroke it. You just go get a 4.8 from the wrecking yard and put that in place of the 5.3. Keep mentioning different things regarding oil control in big block Chevys. I'm running a 4,250 stroke crank and a 540. Please elaborate on what I should do to eliminate windage. You should have a really, really good oil pan with a really good windage tray. And that helps. A 4,250 stroke is not terrible. When you go beyond that, that's when you start running into problems. And we like the Moroso deep sump pans, the square like boat pans, but you can't run them in anything except like an Econo rail dragster or something where there's nothing underneath there. But those work good. But a good windage tray, and like the Moroso one that we use, has an integrated windage tray, and it has kickouts on the pan. So all of that stuff is really good. Long wide open throttle runs, boats and trucks. Yeah, long tracks. The manifold leaks, you get enough heat for... If the manifold leaks, you can tulip a valve. Wouldn't it be leaking? If it's a turbo manifold, isn't it leaking pressure out though? Are high flow cat street legal and paired with shorty headers and a cat back? Is that emissions legal? You have to check with them, the people that make those. They'll be able to tell you. I'm doing a 62416 and a 459 cam. How much? Well, let's put down with race gas. I don't know. I don't know what the other things that you have, Diego. What intake, what heads, all that stuff. The Gen 3 5.3 survived for 6 months on 20 pounds. Surprised that it lasted that long. Yeah, it depends on what the power output's going on that at 20 pounds is going to depend on a lot of things. One, what was the NA thing? Was it a heads cam and intake? Was it just a cam? Was it a small cam? Was it a big cam? What was it? And then also 20 pounds at 14 degrees of timing isn't going to make very much power. So it would last a long time. 20 degrees or 20 pounds of boost on 20 degrees of timing is going to make quite a bit of power. Where do you buy LS harnesses? I don't know. I don't ever get those. How would the Truck Plus work on a stroker 6-liter? It would do exactly what it's supposed to do. Why do you think you can dent exhaust so much? Why does it have less effect than squishing the intake? I think it's probably the pressure. What is the cause of stock parts of older muscle car engines that cause them to throw rods or have catastrophic failure in the bottom end, assuming valve train is stable at high RPM? I don't know that older muscle car engines can be all grouped together. If you talk about one specific one where that happened to, then we could look at that one specific one and go, hey, look, this was too tight of bearing clearance. It was not enough oil flow. It was too much temperature. We could look at the individual thing. Do you plan on testing the Holley High Ram for the big block Chevy? I do want to. And I also want to test. I have one and have had one for a Windsor for a long time. 5.3 with 8.1. Is it too low? No, that's fine. You'd be able to get away with a lot on pump gas. For tie valves were available, I would take stock 202 Chevy valves and tulip cut the face and drill a hole up the stem to reduce the weight. You would actually stem drill it? That's pretty gangster. Why doesn't denting a header make as much? Because God fills a cylinder and man empties it. Wow, he's going all religious on us. Ford cracked manifolds in Jeeps and Hondas, seen valves burn up completely. I have a whole row of burnt valves. I'm still asking why does a leaky exhaust burn the valve unless you're getting a change in, unless the I don't think it's caused by the leak. I think the leak is causing a bad reading on the O2, and then it's running lean under load, and that's what's burning the valve. That's my guess. Because the burning the valve is a temperature thing. On a street application, is a triple disc torque converter necessary, or is a single disc fine? 3,000 good for street use with low buck or truck plus cam. Yeah, 3,000 is more than enough for. I mean, it's not necessary on a low buck truck. You can run that with a stock converter on a 6-liter. 3,000 is more than enough for either one of those cams. I don't know anything about triple disc converters. I don't know guys that are trying to lock it up under load. Are 766 heads any good? I don't know what those are. Oh, 706. Yes, they are good. I'm one of those people who don't suggest hammering manifolds or headers if it's not totally necessary. It is here, Neil, because we have issues with, their V8s typically. And a lot of times we have the manufacturers make them for, one application, and guys try to put it on another application, or they made it for an application that doesn't have power steering and this one does, or whatever. And so you got to dent one of them so that the header misses something else that's there. And it's that part of it's not uncommon. What surprised me when they did that test is how, they went after it. They were Brule and Dulcich and Freiberger were like wailing on this thing. And if you looked at it, there is nobody here that if they looked at that header, but like if I would have put a poll up and showed you a photo of that header and asked you, does this hurt performance? It'd have been 100% yes, that it hurts performance. And looking at it, every time I walked by that header, I'm like, there's no way that could still be the same. And yet I was worried. I did a 3-angle valve job, and now my 317s are, they went to 77 cc's. How did they do that from a 3-angle valve job? Like, how much did you sink that valve? That seems like a lot. My muscle car engines are really focused on are big block Mopar, small block Mopar, big block Chevy, small block Chevy. Well, a lot of those from the factory have steel cranks in them. So the crank is going to be fine. And DZ302 stuff, like the small block Chevy stuff, those were known for spinning lots of RPM. A lot of those small blocks were. The crack sucks air in. I had a burnt valve on a Pontiac with a really bad header and a head exhaust leak in very cold weather. Like, I think it cooled too fast on one side and cracked. Young, I don't have a favorite LS. I like them all. Dents are sometimes necessary because of the options. Yeah. Sagging motor mounts. Yeah, I didn't think about that, but that's also true. Does runner length matter on a turbo buildup? Not for 95% of the people, it doesn't. So many 3800 O2 sensors are melted inside the exhaust. Can an L83 handle twin turbos, stock bottom end, 1,000 horsepower? I don't know. I've never tried one. I would, off the top of my head, say yes. I guess those, the thing that would interest me is I don't know about the rod strength and the piston strength on those. I think that they would. Looking at the piston design scares me because of the piston design and detonation. But on a direct injected motor, you're going to have a hard time getting enough fuel to that is going to be the problem, I think. I think I have a lifter tick. Is there a way to check for a failed lifter without removing the head? Push rod rocker arms are all tight and the engine runs good, but it has a very loud tick at idle. I don't know how you check that other than taking it apart. Can you listen with the like we have those cheap stethoscopes? We can listen to figure out which one it is. They almost punched it shut on one of the primaries, just 3 inches from the flange. You should flash him a picture of the dented header. I don't have one available. I appreciate testing the things that seem obvious because, like the header dent test, assumptions are not fact. No, it's and like doing when they did the salad bowl too thing. There's nobody that would go, "Hey, look, let's cut a big hole in the salad bowl," and that's going to make more power than any of these fancy air filter assemblies. Yeah, Autumn, we assumed it was an LS. My machine top told me they were 77 cc's after it was all said and done. I was shooting for 9.5, but with 77s and an 051, I was worried about being a dog at low RPM. Yeah, you could put a smaller head gasket on it. They have 41 gaskets for those. Can you do the math if you know valve size on CC increase? The math for what? What is valve size and combustion chamber gonna tell me? Are you into JDM cars? Yes, very much. I wrote 3 books on Honda's, set a land speed record with a Civic Si, done lots of stuff. Won a U.S. Touring Car Championship in a Del Sol. So yeah, I like those. Probably my favorite of those. I can't pick a favorite. One of my favorites would be a Gen 3 RX-7. And then also anything with an RB26 and an R25 in it would also be cool. I've seen some great results on terrible turbo manifolds. I know, just get all the exhaust to the turbo and good things happen. So with 706 heads on NA 6-liter plus a camshaft, 3,000 stall, what intake would you recommend? A high RPM to match the cam? So single plane or dual plane is better for high RPM. A single plane is better for high RPM. A single plane is not what I would pick for an LS motor. And you're limiting yourself if you have a really big camshaft. Well, a Truck Plus camshaft is not really big. So 706 heads in a Truck Plus camshaft is going to work good. But that's not going to be a high RPM motor because that's only a 219 camshaft. So the cylinder or the intake that I would recommend for that would be a fast. Most of the engines I fix are 300,000 miles. (9-to-1) compression, big block, 15 pounds of boost, street car. Should I go E85 or 91? Well, if you're listening to the gentleman here running 20 pounds on 11-to-1, for 9-to-1 and 15 pounds, I would run E85 in any boosted thing because that way you can run all the timing in it. If you have that available, and especially that kind of thing is not something you're going to be driving around every day anyways. Valve size and combustion chamber size don't really have anything to do with each other unless they sink the valves or relieve the chamber to enshroud the valves. Yeah, that was my question, was if you did a valve job and you overcut the seat and sink the valve down, then you can increase the combustion chamber size. But I don't know what the formula is for that. There would be math for that surface area and then how far you would sink it relative to chamber volume, but that's beyond my ability to do that in the top of my head. When figuring out valve spring pressure requirements, shouldn't you figure boost pressure against the valve? Yes, we like to add a little bit of spring pressure for boost, but I don't do that when I'm selecting the springs and the camshaft. 212 to 218 is a good for low end boost. Yeah, 212 cam is not very big, and it depends on the size of the motor. A 212 cam on a 200-inch V8 is bigger than it is on a 400-inch V8. I have a Mustang 387 stroker, Windsor, pistons, flat tops, 205, 11.5 to 1, 93 octane, single turbo, 15 pounds of boost, comp cam for power adder. And with daily use AC, it works very well. Is it a blow through carbureted thing? 11.5 to 1 and 15 pounds on 93 octane. Again, it's got to have like single digit timing in it. Well, maybe not on a Ford. I keep thinking LS stuff. Got an LQ4 706 heads. Think it's going to be a torque monster down low. Do I think it's going to be? I've run lots of those, so I know what they do. I have an old GM Performance 502 pump gas crate motor. What would you recommend a change for twin turbo? I'll be a small tire drag car. Will stock rocker studs be able to handle it? RPM. I don't know. The turbo thing and the RPM thing are different things. So I don't know what that combination is or what RPM it's running or any of that stuff. I don't know what intake it is. I don't know what cam it is. I don't know what heads it is. I don't know what the usable RPM range is. The turbos are just going to add to whatever's there. It's going to allow you to make more power. I have a big collection of melted BMW parts. Does it pay to tune on 91 versus 87 with a full exhaust and truck Norris cam kit on an LH9? You will make more power on 91 than you will on 87. I think if you sink a valve unintentionally, you have bigger issues. Yeah, that's something that needs to be cured, yeah. 416, Forge, high ram, 317, ported heads, 6. What Diego, I need to know what the duration is at 50 on the camshaft. And I need to know who ported those heads. The lift doesn't tell me anything, unfortunately, about the camshaft. Boost tries to push the valves open, but most stock engines are oversprung enough to make some boost possible without changing springs until you wear out or you go much higher RPM. Yeah, and when you do, and my point in talking about that earlier was that when we do a valve spring upgrade for a camshaft, we have a lot of extra spring available. We're not at the limit of the spring right there. So we have extra spring to cover the rest of that stuff. 212, 218 with a 5.3 and a T4. Yeah, that's fine. A 212 cam that's a good cam. Will a Truck Plus cam have good chop? Yeah, I posted an idle clip today, but the one I got from Frank, but it was on the low butt truck. I don't think we've posted a Truck Plus cam chop, but we're going to do testing, so we'll run both of those, and I'll do an idle thing clip for people in the dyno. But if the 317 heads on that 416 are ported properly, there's no reason that thing can't go high ram. I don't know if you said what compression it is, but probably like I'm thinking low to mid 600s. Sent you pictures on Messenger for the header bash dents to share here. I can't share it as a photo. It won't allow me to share a photo. It'll only allow me to show a video. So I have to go and make a video and put it up there. Yeah, the idle clip is posted on Instagram and Facebook. The problem with boosting stock springs is they have enough spring to snap mostly at the ends. Have you tried any of the newer Summit LS cams? Yeah, lots of them. The Summit Pro LS stuff, I've run a lot of them. Do you agree with a blow through carb and E85? You don't need an inner core. I would need to know the rest of what's going on with that statement, not as a universal thing, not as an absolute statement, not for every application. An inner core will always add power, no matter what you're doing. The question isn't that. We know that that's the case. Are you running 8-to-1 compression? Are you what are you trying to do with a blow through carburetor and E85? Are you trying to run 50 pounds, 60 pounds, 20 pounds? I just like how high compression feels. Yeah, that's good. And it sounds good too. You got lots of cam timing in it, especially exhaust duration and high compression. It makes it sound good. You never need an inner core. You always want one. I think the reverse of that is true. Well, and I think people want them too. I don't think that I think you both want and need them. I think you run 15 pounds on the 85 and on a blow through carburetor. I think you could do that successfully. And depending on what the static compression is, that stuff, I think you could do that. But I think you will be safer and make more power with an inner core. It's a shame the puppies don't know how knowledgeable I am. They do. I tell them all the time. I keep telling them, look, we're going for a walk. You guys should behave. I'm kind of a big deal. And they're like, yeah, you're not. Just let us go and let us run free. Even on a Honda Jazz. I don't think I've ever driven. Is a Jazz like a Honda Fit? Diego, I need the intake and exhaust duration at 50 to know what the cam does, but I think I've given you kind of what I think. Have you snapped any valve springs? I have. I've broken a beehive spring on my Engine Masters motor. And then because we replaced the beehive springs that we had on the airflow research heads, we ran like 450 or 500 pulls on it when I was doing all my testing, because I don't know the first time. It's not going to be right the first time I put it together, but I can learn. I can be trained to make power. And so we ran all these tests. I'm like, well, before we go to the Engine Masters Challenge, I'm going to change these valve springs just to make sure that these things have a lot of miles on them, have a lot of pulls on them. I'm going to, and really high lift cam stuff, because that's what we were using. So I'm going to change them. And then we changed them and we made a few runs, and one of the new ones broke. And so I put the old ones back on, and we had to fix the head, but I put the old ones back on, and that's what we ran the Engine Masters Challenge with. Measuring CC increase from valve job will be same equation as measuring displacement. I don't think that that's true. Because of the things that are going around with the valve. And as you if you take the diameter of the valve and sink at a fixed amount, you have to figure out what that amount is based on the angle that you put on there. Because it's not just like, okay, I've lowered this an inch or half inch or a tenth of an inch or whatever it is. So I don't think you'd be able to do it that way. Maybe you would. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. But I don't think it works like that. Is there a significant difference between air over air versus air over water intercores? I have videos up that show the difference between an air to air and an air to water intercore. But the big difference is that an air to water will always be able to make more cooling and more power, because you can get lower than ambient transfer medium in an air to water intercore. We just run ice water in it, and you can't do that on an air to air. So as an absolute thing, but in normal workings, an air to air versus an air to water for a short pass or whatever, they both work well if you're using ambient water. If you're running a situation like out on a road course, I'd pick an air to air because you have like constant flow. And with an air to water, the recovery rate would be different because you'd have to have a secondary heat exchanger. For drag racing or Bonneville, we run air to water. We run big ice water tanks in it. So I say it's situational. Summit Pro Less Stage 3 Turbo Cam, they changed for some reason. Do you know why? I don't know, maybe because somebody kept telling them that they need to have smaller cams. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I love the guys at Summit. They're great guys. LQ4 706 currently truck Norris. Is there a cam that you would recommend more for a 1-ton truck to tow a trailer? Truck never sees more than 5,500. No, that would be the truck. That would be the camshaft that I would recommend for it. Have you ever tested cold size pipe sizing affects horsepower? Yes, I have videos up where we made a significant change, not a Cletus style change like he did, but we did a realistic kind of change. And also, and there wasn't really any significant change in what we did. We went from a short 3-inch pipe to a really, really big 3.5-inch pipe, I think is what we did. And then, but I did do an intercooler and discharge tube change, and that made a big difference in power on a centrifugal supercharger. Can an LH9 make 500 plus horsepower, 500 NA wheel horsepower? No, not an NA one. Not with a cam kit, injectors, and a pump to support it. You can make, on a 5.3, you can make 500 flywheel horsepower, and we've made 540 flywheel, but getting it to make 500 wheel horsepower would be a very, very expensive high RPM build. Very easy to do with boost, though. We broke 22 valves on a 4-cylinder. The most I've ever seen is when the guys did the Honda motor and check piston to valve clearance on the primary cam. And then as soon as it went into VTEC, it broke off. It bent all the valves. Was a 5-valve? Okay. I figured you could have broken some valves twice. Yeah, VVT. So big compression is boost. Why not both? Just less boost. Because you gain a lot more power from a pound of boost than you do from a point of compression. What about a Summit 8712? I don't know what that is. And you're going to be really hard pressed to find something better than the cam that you have in there, if this is the truck Norris question. If it flows enough, no reason to go bigger. Richard, with the fuel injectors, fuel pump, truck plus all supporting mods. I don't know. I've never run that combination. I don't know about the fast intake on that. Just bought a new oil pump for my LQ4. Would it bolt right on? Is there anything I have to mess with? No, a new oil pump just bolts on. I'm thinking Scottish. I'm thinking less than 500. Maybe, yeah, I don't know. If the 706 heads are stock, that's going to be limiting. I have 3-inch intercooler piping and 2.5-inch air to water intercooler. Will that be too much of a restriction? These are leftover parts. I'm throwing a car together. I would just put it on and run it. Then if it's stuff that you have, I would just run it. The intercooler size. The nice thing about an air to water is you don't need nearly as big a one to do the same kind of cooling as you do on an air to air. So I'd need to look at the size of it and and it's easy to find out if that's a restriction. Once you get it all together and running, you just put your boost gauge on one side of it and put your boost gauge on the other side of it and see if the boost is different. Higher compression with less boost makes for a more punchy combination when you're out of boost. There's a trade-off. Should I get the fast or the truck version? They both make exactly the same power. The LSX and the LSX RT, the LSXR and the LSX RT make the exact same power. So that's more of a fitment issue. Running a high-rise intake with a carburetor for fuel and meth injection is better than any and all intercooler setups. Test it, make a video, and prove me wrong. I don't need to prove you wrong. I already know that that's wrong. You won't find a better intercooler than an intercooler. Rich, what's going on? Duration at 50, 231, 239. Okay, yeah, that's kind of where I was thinking. So I don't know. It's going to make more than 600 and probably less than 650. So Zootruck, do I get to run the alcohol carburetor with the intercooler then? I believe water-cooled turbo will be better than air-to-air. Than an air-cooled turbo? Are you talking about cooling the turbo, or are you talking about an intercooler? Yeah, meth injection doesn't do what an intercooler does. It's helpful and it's better than not having it, but it's not. It doesn't do what an intercooler does. And if for no other reason, let's say it was able to do the same in one cylinder or two or five, it doesn't do it in 8 though. Will switching to E85 guarantee me more power? It will if you're boosted, yes. You ran a few 408 stroker tests. Can you recall any of those results? Yes. The 408 that I did made 625. I just did a bunch of tests with it. I just wrote some stories for it. The one that I did on the 408 and the 416s made more, but the 408 was 625 and it had a 240, 246 cam. It had AFR 245s. It had a fast LSXR T intake manifold, inch and 7/8 headers. It was, I think that was a dish piston 408. And then if you look at the intake manifold test for the LS3, the carbureted stuff in particular, we ran that test on a 416 stroker. And so there's a bunch of different intake manifolds that we ran on there. And you can see, I'm pretty sure that a bunch of those were more than 600 horsepower. LS7 head test, performance design. Yeah, well, like what did that thing do? Yeah, that was 650 for that one. And that one is a 415 LS3 stroker, Wiseco internals, flat tops, AFR LS3 heads. It had a big BTR cam in it, 247, 258. Inch and 7/8 headers. That one had the performance, the carbon TR intake manifold, the adjustable one. So kind of like a high ramish or an LSX HR intake manifold. So like I said, that's why I was picking between, low to mid 600s. High compression and less boost reduces your margin of error. Yeah. Air to air intercooler will be beat in power by water cooled turbo. So I don't know if because it seems like you're talking about two things there, Sean. A water cooled turbo with no intercooler will not make more power than a non-water cooled turbo with an air-to-air intercooler. So if that's what you're saying, that's not accurate. The water cooled center section of the turbo is good for longevity of the turbo, but not necessarily for producing a cooler charge temperature, because that's going to be based on the pressure that the turbo is applying. Always better to have a good engine than a horsepower hero. Can you do a 5.3 383 stroker setup and make 500 wheel horsepower? Yes, I have a 383 stroker videos up on it where we made 600 NA horsepower, which would be 500 wheel horsepower. And that wasn't an all-in kind of thing either. That was a 383, probably a flat top piston, might have been a dish. I'd have to go back and look. It had good ported heads on it. It had a decent sized cam, like probably the comp cam, if I remember, that that 459 or the 469 cam. It had a fast intake manifold. It had that one actually had roller rockers on it. It had the 102 throttle body and an LSX HR inch and 7/8. Yeah. And that one made right at 600, like 602 or something. .600 horsepower. Final best. Yeah, 603 at 6,400 and 543 foot-pounds at 4,800. It was a flat top piston. Those were probes. LS6 aluminum block. It had TEA ported stage 2.5 or whatever. The 243 heads on it. The LS6 heads. LSXR or LSXRT. We ran both of them. Comp 172 rockers. American Racing inch and 7/8 headers. Collector extensions. That one looks like we were running it on a Mephi, which was weird back then. Always better to have a good point or a good engine. Okay. What was Dan's point? Yeah. Yeah, better to have a big tuning window. So you have an input on die cast versus sand cast heads. The ones I have are die cast. Are one stronger than the other? I don't know. I've never seen anybody do any kind of absolute test on the two different style casting heads for the 706 or 862 stuff, if that's what you're talking about. I don't know which one of those ultimately would be stronger, if that's even an issue when we're talking about maybe deck thickness stuff. Proven the more air you force through a motor, no material, or I'm sure no matter what it takes, makes more power with more boost. I like the sound of the stroker setup due to having emissions restrictions. This is a way to maximize more horsepower on the street. I'll take the bet that air to air, so you're saying that a non-intercooled, water-cooled center section turbo will make more power than an air to air intercooler? Yeah, that's not going to happen. Do you ever get a smile when random numbers you come across ever match up with engine displacements, like when addresses start off with stuff? Yeah. I don't know how you think a water-cooled center section turbo has any effect on charge temperature at all, because that's not been my experience in my 30 years of dyno testing with turbo stuff. But an intercooler can change it by hundreds of degrees. Hundreds, I tell you, hundreds. Okay, so you guys can help answer this question. It's one of the questions I got from the community. Will I run into any issues with an LQ9, which is a flat top 6-liter, truck Norris cam, 706 heads, Trailblazer SS intake, long tube headers? Can I run 87 with this setup, or is it strictly 91 to 93 with octane booster? What do you guys think? What's the max bore on a 6-liter GM block? I don't like to go more than 30 on them. Some guys go 4065, but I would make sure that to check the thickness of the walls. Yeah, water-cooled center section is not to change the air temperature. It doesn't do that. It's for longevity and to prevent coking of the oil. What's your favorite turbo cam setup for a 4.8 in the short wheelbase truck? Put a cam 6.2 in and want more power and can't turbo the 6.2 cylinder wall thickness. No, you can turbo the 6.2 very easily. It's just that you don't need to go crazy with it. And the nice thing about a 6.2 is you don't have to run a lot of boost to make a lot of power. How much of a difference will it make going from a 4-inch downpipe to a 5-inch downpipe? At what power level and what turbo do you have? Do you have a turbo? What's the exit size of the turbo? It will stay the same charge temperature as air-to-air cooler. Okay. So you don't think that there's any compression under boost then, right? That's what you're saying? I'm putting together an LQ9 that's 40 over. That said, I had a buddy that did 690 to the tire on a 2JZ on a single 3-inch full exhaust. PS Racing 85102. That's a big one. It's a big boy. Are you trying to max out that turbo? Watched something recently where Gale Banks was showing the difference of sand cast and die cast. He said die cast is stronger. Okay. Water cooling a turbo through the cooling system, which is going to be 200 degrees. Speaking of 2J, there was a car at Test and Tune tonight with a ProCharge 2JZ. First time I saw that combination. Turbo will never see 25 pounds. You get greater gains with a bigger exhaust at higher pressures, but so I just don't know. I don't know where there's got to be a limit to where we go up in size of the exhaust side of the turbo, and it just doesn't do anything. And 4-inch, I think we're already there. But I've never tried running things with really big turbos and at really, really high boost levels, like 50, 60 pounds. I've never tried that. And those I definitely would err on the bigger side. But I don't know where we go past like 4 inches, if that's going to be a big change. A ProCharge 2J would be neat. I would much rather have a turbo on a 2J because it's so small, and the low compression ones are so soft in NA power production. 706 heads raise the compression a whole point. They do compared to a 317 head, yeah. Because you have 61 versus 71 or 2 or ish cc chambers. So 10 cc's is going to be 1 full point. Oh, we've got 1 more minute. I've been here a long time. I've been here hecka long. Here, let's do our dyno graph again. Wah! Richard, you should do a big bang on the Vortec. What's your horsepower goal on the Mustang? I don't have one. I'm not building the motor for that. We're building the motor and putting it in so that we can do testing on turbos and cams and things like that. Have you got any information you can give us on oilless turbos? No, the only testing I've ever done on an oilless turbo didn't work. The turbo broke. So I'm probably the wrong, this was a long time ago, but I'm probably the wrong guy to ask about that. I'm assuming that they have them worked out now. I'm kind of hoping. Our GT 40 heads better than trick flow aluminum heads? No, they're not. Near. So did you guys answer the question? Did you think he's going to run into problems trying to run 87 octane? Scottish, I can't do a poll when we have this streaming. I got no poll ability. First time making it to the stream, welcome. And on that note, it is time to go. Thank you guys all for showing up, and I will be back tomorrow.